Hi everybody, it's Jared O'D here from Dynamis, and today we're starting our video series talking about what it's like to learn and to teach self-defense out there in the world. Today I've got Annette with me, and that's going to be helping me by dissecting one of the scenarios that she did with a bad guy role player in Gear recently. We're going to look at the video of her doing that and pick out some of the key issues that she felt as she went through the scenario. It should be really interesting. I hope you find it so. If you have feedback for us, please do send it along. I'm going to start this running right now, and I'll check in with you at the end of the talk. So enjoy. I'm going to stop this at various points, and I'll ask you kind of what was going on in your head or whatever. Let's play it through once first. Here it goes. Turn it off.
Have you got a fucking steel problem? I'm gonna fucking take it easy. I am gonna fucking take it easy.
Yeah, so some lots of great camera work there. Let's just play that through from the beginning again. So what's happening at the beginning is you've got a bad guy role player in Gear, and he's encroaching into your space.
Yeah.
If we had the volume turned up, then we could probably hear a lot of the verbal aggression that's going on. What was going on there at that point for you?
Quite a lot, I think, because it's somebody that I don't know. So before, when I've trained, you know, if I do have somebody in high gear, it's usually somebody that in a training class you might have interacted with. So before, by the time you build up to the high gear scenario, sort of after a couple of hours in there, it's really good if you've managed to train, you know, with a few different people. And I'd been given like a couple of the girls to look after, which was fine as well. But I had kind of watched people, and in some of the scenarios, you know, you could tell he'd been sort of fairly intense with people. I was also quite aware of my nerve root issue and the fact that the bad guy role players didn't seem to be adjusting their behavior whatsoever. So I was kind of thinking, this is all good practice, but I don't know how hard he's going to go, you know? So there's that.
So let me stop you there. Let me stop you there for just 1 minute then. If I just stop sharing that screen. So you're saying that at the training event that you were at, they had some role players doing some work, but that you what you observed is that you didn't see that the role players were sort of ramping up the intensity for the more experienced people at the session, and again ramping down the intensity for the people who weren't so experienced.
No, they weren't. It was the same for everybody, and there seemed to be kind of like an enjoyment almost of kind of getting into gear and playing the hard ass, you know, that kind of attitude. I was just aware, I think there was quite a different training environment, so I was probably a bit more cautious than I would normally be, which is not a bad thing because it makes it quite real.
Yeah, so I mean, as a trainer, I can see the point in having, you know, complete surprises and that element of randomness coming into the training at a certain point in a trainee's journey. I can see that would be important almost to take that level of spontaneity and randomness up to a high level. But as I understand it, you were on a course that was basically for novices, raw beginners coming in to a women's self-defense event. And when somebody's really quite competent, you want to start really surprising them.
Yeah.
Do you see what I'm saying about that?
I see what you're saying about that, and I suppose in our training as well, you know, there were points where things were slightly more off-piste, and you're kind of testing more the reactions that you know you might get or mixing training in. But I think it was a mixed group, but there was men and women, but mostly the women, I would say, in the group were women that weren't experienced of doing self-defense training. There were probably women that were a bit hesitant. Some of them were partners of guys that were doing self-defense training.
Okay.
Some were people that had just come there on their own accord. There was a couple of girls that were like twins, like maybe about 15 years old or so. So there was a real mixed bag, you know. And it's kind of what I fed back as well at the end of the session, when they said whether I thought about doing a women's only course, would that be good, or should it be mixed? My recommendation was to keep it mixed, but also to be aware of, you know, if they look at the stats, then about 1 in 4 that's coming through that door would have experienced some kind of sexual assault, and they need to be cognizant of that fact, you know, that you can't just go gung-ho like you might ordinarily would in a group. And also that male social violence, which I think most of them all get, is very different. And I did bring this up about 5 times throughout the course, because I thought it was a really important point to make, because it's all so heavily geared against, you know, the typical bar brawl, which for most women is not an issue, you know.
Yeah, and in many respects, the type of fight that a woman might get into will be far more emotionally significant event than the bar brawl with the complete stranger.
Yeah.
So I'm talking about the stats that would say that a woman who ends up in a fight where she really has to perform successfully and get out a door and run, or perform successfully and take off down the street and find, you know, safety that way. That's more than often going to be with somebody that she knows, right? That's what the statistics would tell us. And it's not, you know, a stranger who tipped over your pint or something like that in a bar, which, you know, the psychology would say it's much easier to do harm to somebody who you don't know, and don't have any relationship with, rather than doing harm to somebody who, you know, maybe you just told them you loved them 10 minutes ago.
Yeah.
So, you know, that would back up everything you're saying, I think, about the need to be sensitive to the differences, wouldn't it?
Yeah, no, I think so. I think so. And there's a real parallel that's always drawn for me, you know, with the fact of partner violence or violence by someone, you know, it can be sort of almost transferring to a training situation where you've been training with a nice instructor all day, and suddenly he puts his gear on and a helmet and he looks completely different, you know. And so that can also have a real kind of psychological impact, you know, if you don't transition that in a good way, because it's kind of like the mask comes off, or suddenly, you know, you see the good guy turning into the bad guy, you know, so that can have a real impact as well. So you need to be really cautious of that too, I think. Yeah. And what also struck me is that it doesn't really matter how many scenarios you do like that. I find, you know, as soon as somebody gets gear on, etc., there is always like a massive part that just say, like, I really don't want to be here right now, you know, but you feel better once you have done it, and you get, you know, it's still, I suppose, the kind of fear thing that you do overcome, and it's less and less, but it's definitely quite real. And spoke to a friend of mine who's also a survivor, does the same kind of training in the US, and she's very much the same. You know, she's often really tempted to wimp out, you know, but she doesn't, you know, and I think that's the whole thing. Therefore, I think you can train with better learning outcomes when it's done in a progressive and comfortable way. Whereas if you're not entirely comfortable, you know, it all kind of goes over in a flash. And I can certainly see that in this video. Now, there's some good stuff, but I can also see like real just kind of get this over with kind of thing, as opposed to learning, you know.
Yeah. So so I think we've just discussed really a couple of things. If I go back to my notes from earlier in the week, I said in that comment, I said that the tricks with bad guy role playing are that, one, you have to establish a safe, flat hierarchy environment so that people feel comfortable and, in capitals, supported. And I think we've covered off a few of those issues just now about, you know, especially I think it's really interesting what you said about the difference between the instructor who's being really helpful and kind and coaching you through some of the elements earlier in the day, and then the same person puts on the gear and a helmet and they look, you know, different, and they have a different effect and so on. So when that happens, I think that supportive atmosphere is really important, and creating that can be really difficult. I believe that creating that can be really difficult in a mixed group.
It can. One of the things I think might help is you know, when people are putting on the gears and get suited up, is if you can kind of, you know, that you're close to them, that they don't go away and get suited up and then kind of come back in, or stay outside for a while until you're kind of ready to do the scenario, because then the impact is quite sudden and quite aggressive. And again, you know, you can draw many parallels there. Whereas if you see getting suited up, and you can go up and say, go, you know, come have a poke at this impact gear. You know, you can feel it's not a Superman suit, so they can kind of touch and feel the guy, you know, in a non-creepy way. But, you know, just it makes it more transitional, and it makes it less of a kind of sudden and kind of hard impact psychologically, I think.
Let's have a look at what happens throughout the rest of this clip here. We're only about 2 seconds into it. So let me go ahead and share the screen again for just a moment. There you go. There you go. So you should be able to see that.
Yeah.
So let's roll it forward. The volume's still off, so we're not hearing what's going on, but we're going to see. Here we go. So you're really using, just up to that point there, you're really using those hands to create some safe space in front of you. Mm-hmm. How natural and habitual is that for you now? Because I mean, knowing the history of the training that you and I have done, that was something we worked on an awful lot at the very beginning, wasn't it? Get those hands to come up and protect your space, to set that boundary and really enforce it. So how habitual is that for you now in that kind of situation?
That's pretty habitual. You know, I didn't really even think about it. I used to have to say, okay, right, remember to get your hands off when you start the scenario. But no, it definitely is, and it creates a space. And that's, watch the video, you can see I'm always sort of like doing a 3/4 of a circle backwards in keeping that space. You know, and I can tell looking at it now as well. There's a few times where I could probably have gone for a haymaker or a tackle or something. You can see he was almost getting into it, and would have done if he'd had the right distance.
Tactically, what that does, when you put those barriers in place, it means that when he reaches for you, it has to be outside those arms. Mm-hmm. You can see that on the picture, that frozen frame is just above us there. And I think, you know, it's a small thing, but it's huge. And what it does is it really helps to make the situation more manageable for you. It's one of my huge bugbears when I go around the country teaching staff, and I think people miss the subtlety of it and the strategy in it. Keeping those hands in a good place when you start, it's just so important. But let's see what you do with it then, because I think eventually you do give this guy a bit of a headache. So let's watch it. Fantastic. So it looked like a sort of preemptive palm strike.
It was a preemptive palm strike, and then I think it was sort of more like a.
There it is.
Elbow slash, yeah. And then after that, it was more like an elbow slash forearm and kind of a couple of hammer strikes. Well, actually, those first. And then I just kind of hit him in the face. But it was over really, really quickly. But he was holding on to his head for a little bit, so he must have had a bit of a headache.
Well, yeah, good. That's the whole point, so that's fine. But I was interested to watch the preemptive strike because, again, looking at our history and how we train together to get you achieving these things, I think being tactical like that, you know, making the decision to go to that level, to start smacking him in the face that early in the fight, I mean, that takes some serious amounts of conditioning, you know, mental conditioning to change from, well, I'm going to wait and see what happens and hopefully he'll calm down, to that moment where you recognize this is a real problem and I have to take control here. So I'm going to ask you what was going through your head, but it's okay to say there was nothing much because I think it looks a lot like a conditioned response. It looks like at this point, you just the mathematics, the equation in your head just popped out that answer and you hit him and you kept hitting.
Yeah, no, I think a lot of it is conditioning. I think also that you realize in a fight or through doing some of these scenarios, that if somebody's gonna go for you, they're gonna go for you. And if they're being that aggressive and you have done 3/4 of a circle around, then it's a good time to strike. It's a preemptive strike, and it's a valid thing to do. And so I think if I was in an actual situation, I don't want to go 10 rounds with somebody. I want to hit them hard, and I want to hit them fast, and I want to get out of there, and that's very much my mantra. So I suppose it's also through personal experience, so there can be like a little bit of a trigger to just end the shit when it starts, just to finish it. So that can be that. I just wasn't really willing to go there. I just think that response just works better for me, Then I'm in the mood. There is really no big thought process of will I, won't I. There is like zero hesitation at this point. When I reacted the way I did, it was like, oh well, he didn't even get to do a tackle or a haymaker. But I'm thinking, like, in a real life scenario, that's what I would have been doing, and that would have been the right thing to do, right? I'm not going to wait for the guy to punch me in the head, because it might only take one punch.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's very valid. One of the things we do as trainers then is try to make sure that you're ready for each different way that the scenario might unfold. So in functional edge system, we talk about 3 different timings: the proactive timing, the counteractive timing, and the reactive timing. And those sort of delineate whether you're going early, like you did in that scenario we're looking at, or you're going, kind of roughly at the same time because you've seen what's happening, just not quite soon enough. And then that's counteractive timing. And then there's this reactive timing where actually you kind of missed a lot of the cues, and now the other person's well and truly started whatever they're going to do, and you're having to work from a way behind the curve. And the theory there is that, as much as we like to train for, proactive timing, really, it's more likely in most scenarios, if they're not in gear and you're in a busy place and suddenly it erupts out of nowhere because the person's having an episode, you're more likely to be surprised by what's going on and maybe behind the curve mentally. In a way, we could argue that you'd had a couple of hours to build up to that fight. You know what I'm saying? Whereas in reality, it might just be seconds and so on. So all the responses are valid.
Yeah, although I suppose if, because I think he was a pretty good role player. So as soon as I kind of stood in front of him before he started like very, very heavy verbal aggression, there was just a look in his eye, and it was one of intimidation, it was one of anger. And also with, I think, all of those verbal cues as well, it would have been less surprising if he hadn't done it after about half a minute of that, That would obviously be the initial shock. So if it was somebody you knew who was suddenly behaving like that, then obviously that would be the impact of that. But to me, if somebody was being that aggressive verbally and also giving those kind of cues or facial expressions, I would totally expect them to explode.
Can I ask you, did you enjoy the experience? I mean, you've done stuff in gear before. It's always frightening and a bit scary and a bit stomach churning to begin with. But how did you feel afterwards?
No, I felt great afterwards. I think it's always a good experience to do, and it is empowering. And there was a lot of chuckles from the people in the group and kind of high five going on afterwards. So it's good in a supportive environment, and it's always fun to see the surprise on people's faces, because I suppose I don't really fit the outline of a ninja. But yeah, it's always empowering, and it's always fun, and it's good to get practice. Even if kind of going into you feel a bit unsure about it, but I think practice is important. And it's I know some people do self-defense for a certain time. We've spoken about that, women before, and then they go off to do something else. Whereas I don't really think, well, it's a personal thing as well, but I think it's like anything, you get rusty when you don't repeat, and that doing a certain amount on a regular basis is important to keep up your skill level,
Fantastic. Yeah, it's so true. I think also, I mean, you touched on it there, but it's something I've been guilty of in the past. I think when we've done these sessions, is we really should celebrate in a big way when somebody comes through a scenario and does anything correctly.
Hmm.
I think when I've been the coach and running a session, sometimes I forget to do that. I think that's in my nature as a coach is I expect people to do what's expected.
Hmm.
But and because maybe I've kind of been at this for such a long time, I forget to see the really great things that my trainees are doing. And I think the trainees forget to see what their colleagues, their fellow trainees are doing. And we've really got to encourage that people just, jump and clap and hug each other and give each other high fives after they've done something, as amazing as protecting themselves from a really violent person.
Hmm.
So that's a note to myself here at the kind of towards the end of our talk, about the supportive atmosphere and how we can really engender that and encourage it. Really
Yeah.
important.
I think you've done it in different ways. So getting through the class and maybe being quite serious sometimes, but you always shared video and you always shared good comments afterwards. So and you would all say if something was good, etc., and be encouraging. So I think that's important too, and so that for people to be able to watch it back or to comment or say, hey, take a look at this, or here's a great shot of you doing this or the other, that was just as encouraging. And it's also quite nice to receive afterwards, because there could be a million things going through your head, by the time you're leaving the class, and sort of when you get home and have a glass of wine and sit and think about it, and you go, yeah, that actually looks pretty good, and so that works in a different way, but it works just as well.
Well, there you have it, everybody. Thanks for listening to our talk there. Annette and I were trying to pick apart some of the key issues we think came around when she did that scenario recently. I hope it was interesting. Do send us some feedback, whatever way you can find it, either on our Facebook page or through email or however you can. We'll be doing a series of these talks soon, so your feedback can be really appreciated, and we look forward to welcoming you along to the next one that we do, which should be very soon. Thanks.